There is a city on the Volga where the snow once fell on 100,000 frozen men. For 5 months, it was the loudest place on earth. Then it went quiet. A quiet so complete that survivors said they could hear the river moving again under the ice. This was a city that carried a dictator's name. By the time the guns stopped, it had become his graveyard. Whole streets had been ground to powder. Factories stood open to the sky, their machines twisted into shapes no engineer had drawn. And in the cellars, in the sewers, in the shattered apartment blocks, lay the remains of an army that had marched east in the summer sun. Certain of victory, they called themselves the finest soldiers in the world. Many of them believed it. By winter, they were eating their horses and their boots. Then nothing at all. This is the story of how an army of nearly 300,000 men walked into a city and never walked out. It is a story the winners told one way, and the losers told another. And the truth lies somewhere in the cold ground between them. It begins. As these things so often do, with a map, a deadline, and a man who would not listen. In the summer of 1942, the German war machine turned its full weight toward the south of the Soviet Union. The previous winter had been a shock. The drive on Moscow had failed in the snow. So now the planners looked elsewhere, toward the oil fields of the Caucasus, the fuel that kept tanks and aircraft alive. Without oil, the war in the East could not be won. With it, perhaps anything was possible. The offensive was called Case Blue. Its armies rolled across the open steppe in a great wave, kicking up dust that could be seen for miles. Town after town fell behind them. To the men in the columns, it felt like 1941 again, the summer of easy victories, before the cold had taught them fear. And there, on the western bank of the Volga, sat a city in their path, an industrial city, a city of tractor works and gun factories, strung out for miles along the river. A vital artery where Soviet supplies moved north and south. It was also, by an accident of history, named for Stalin himself. At first, it was only one objective among many. Take it, secure the flank, move on to the oil. That was the plan. No one yet understood that this single city would swallow the campaign whole. On the 23rd of August, 1942, the city died for the first time. The German air fleet came in waves, hour after hour, and turned the streets into a furnace. By most accounts, it was one of the most concentrated bombing raids of the entire war on the Eastern Front. Wooden houses vanished in sheets of flame. The oil tanks on the riverbank burst and sent burning rivers down toward the Volga, until the water itself seemed to catch fire. Thousands of civilians are believed to have died in those first days. The exact number we will likely never know. Many never had the chance to flee. The authorities had been slow to evacuate. Some say they feared that emptying the city would look like defeat. When the smoke cleared, the city was a skeleton. And here lies one of the cruel ironies of Stalingrad. The bombing was meant to break it open. Instead, it built the perfect fortress. Rubble does not surrender. Every collapsed building became a strong point. Every cellar became a bunker. Every heap of broken concrete became a place where a handful of defenders could hold against a tank. The Germans had turned the city to ruins. Now they would have to take the ruins, one stone at a time. The soldiers had a word for what came next. Rattenkrieg. The war of the rats. This was not the war they had been trained for. There were no sweeping advances here, no grand encirclements on the open plain. There was only the next room, the next staircase, the next cellar full of men who would not move. A factory could change hands floor by floor. The Germans holding the upper levels, the Soviets the basement, each side listening to the other, breathed through the broken ceilings. Distances were measured not in miles, but in meters, sometimes in the width of a single corridor. The fighting was close enough to be personal. Rifle, grenade, knife, sharpened spade. Men killed each other in the dark and could not always tell, in the moment, whose uniform they had torn. For the German Sixth Army, one of the largest and proudest formations in the entire Wehrmacht, it was a slow poisoning. Every day they gained a little ground. Every day they paid for it in men they could not replace. The veterans of the summer began to disappear, and with them, something else. The certainty? The feeling that this would be over soon. The river was only a few hundred meters away. Some days, it might as well have been on the moon. Everything the defenders had came across the Volga. On the eastern bank stood the Soviet guns and the reserves. On the western bank, the dying city. Between them, a stretch of cold water that became one of the most dangerous places on earth. Every night, the boats went out. Ammunition, food, and fresh men going one way. The wounded coming back. German artillery and aircraft hunted the crossings without mercy. A direct hit could send a packed barge to the bottom in seconds. And the river was wide, and the water was freezing. And few who went under came up again. The general who held the city for the Soviets understood something brutal about this. The closer his men stayed to the enemy, the harder it was for the German guns and planes to strike them without hitting their own. So he ordered his soldiers to hug the Germans, to keep the line so close that the killing had to be done face to face. It was a tactic of pure desperation. It worked, for the men ferried into the city. The odds were grim. By some accounts, a freshly landed soldier might survive only a day, sometimes less, before he was wounded or killed. They knew it as they stepped off the boats. They went anyway, got in a battle of ruins. Certain ruins became legends. There was a single apartment building, defended for weeks by a small group of Soviet soldiers under a junior commander whose name became attached to the place. A handful of men, well supplied with anti-tank weapons and sheer stubbornness, held it against repeated assaults. Soviet propaganda would later claim the defenders inflicted staggering losses on the attackers. The figures are disputed, and the winners had every reason to exaggerate. But the building held. It became a symbol, proof that a few determined men in the right rubble could stop an army. There was a grain elevator on the southern edge of the city, a great concrete tower visible for miles. A tiny garrison turned it into a fortress, and for days the Germans threw men in armor at it before it finally fell. German soldiers who survived wrote about it with something close to disbelief. They could not understand how so few had held so long. And above it all rose a hill, the maps called Height 102, an ancient burial mound known as Mamayev Kurgan. Whoever held it could see the whole battlefield. It changed hands again and again, until the soil itself was so churned with metal that in spring, the snow there was said to melt gray with iron and ash. Autumn came, and the battle settled into a rhythm of attrition that neither side could afford and neither side would stop. For the Germans, the city had become a trap of their own making, a magnet that drew in more and more of their strength. To take it, the Sixth Army pulled its best units into the streets, into the meat grinder, where their advantages of speed and maneuver meant nothing. For the Soviets, the order had come down from the very top, not one step back. The river was at their spines. There was nowhere left to retreat to. Hold and bleed and hold again. Both sides fed the battle. Both sides watched their young men vanish into the rubble. By autumn, the Germans held perhaps 90% of the city, a fact their commanders reported with pride and their soldiers heard with exhaustion, because that last 10% would not break. A few narrow strips of riverbank, a few shattered factories, clung to by men who simply refused to die quietly. The Germans were winning the city, meter by meter. What almost none of them noticed was what was happening out on the steppe, far beyond the ruins on the long, thinly held flanks where their attention had drifted away. That was where the war was about to turn to fight inside the city. The German command had stripped its flanks. The Sixth Army was punching forward into Stalingrad, but its long sides, stretching out across the open plain to the northwest and the south, could not be held by Germans alone. There were not enough of them. So those flanks were given to the armies of Germany's allies. Romanian troops, Hungarian, Italian. These men were not weak by nature, but many were short of modern anti-tank guns, short of armor, short of the tools needed to stop a determined assault. They held a vast frontage with too little of everything, and they knew it. Their commanders sent warnings up the chain, again and again, about how exposed they were. The warnings were not heeded in time. The Soviets, meanwhile, were doing something the Germans had failed to notice. While the world's eyes were fixed on the dramatic struggle in the ruins, Soviet planners were quietly gathering a vast new force out on the steppe. Fresh divisions, tanks, artillery moved into position under cover of darkness and secrecy. They were not planning to reinforce the city. They were planning to reach around it. The plan had a name: Operation Uranus. And it was aimed not at the strong German fist in the city, but at the weak shoulders on either side. On the 19th of November, 1942, the Soviet guns opened fire, and the world the Germans knew flanks like a hammer. To the northwest first, then to the south. The Soviet armor smashed into the lines held by Germany's allies and tore straight through. Within hours, the carefully drawn front was coming apart. Within days, the two great Soviet pincers were racing across the snow toward each other. Behind the city, behind the Sixth Army. On the 23rd of November, they met in a matter of days. The hunters had become the hunted. Nearly 300,000 men, the bulk of the Sixth Army and parts of others, were sealed inside a ring of Soviet steel. The Germans had a word for it: Der Kessel. The cauldron. Inside the cauldron, there was still time. The encirclement was new, the Soviet ring still thin in places. A swift, determined breakout to the west might have saved much of the army while the enemy was still off balance. The commander on the ground, General Paulus, had officers urging exactly that. Fight your way out. Now, before the ring hardens, the decision was not his to make alone. And the answer that came back from the highest authority in Germany was a single, fatal word: no. The order from above was absolute. The Sixth Army would not break out. It would stand fast where it was. The encircled pocket was renamed, with bitter optimism, Fortress Stalingrad. It was a fortress with no walls, no supplies, and no way home. The reasoning, such as it was, rested on a promise. The head of the German Air Force had given his personal assurance that his aircraft could supply the trapped army from the sky, that they could fly in day after day the hundreds of tons of food, fuel, and ammunition a force that size needed to survive. It was a promise that could not be kept. And some of his own officers said so at the time. The numbers were impossible. The army needed, by most estimates, several hundred tons of supplies every single day simply to hold on. The air fleet, flying through brutal winter weather, through Soviet fighters and flak, losing aircraft and crews on every run, never came close. On the best days, it delivered a fraction of what was promised. On many days, far less. On some, nothing at all. So the trapped men waited and rationed and watched the sky. They had been told to hold the fortress. What they were really doing was starving in place, by order. While the temperature began to fall, there was one more hope, and for a few days in December, it almost looked real. A relief force was assembled outside the ring, under one of Germany's most capable commanders, with orders to punch a corridor through to the trapped army. The operation was called Winter Storm. It set off from the southwest, grinding toward the cauldron through snow and Soviet resistance, and for a time, It made ground dot the men inside the pocket could hear it coming. Some climbed onto the ruins at night and swore they could see the distant flashes of the relief forces' guns on the horizon. Salvation, just over there, a few dozen kilometers away. A few dozen kilometers, across frozen open ground, into the teeth of a tightening Soviet grip. The relief force was stopped short. It could go no further. And here came the final, cruel turn. For the breakout to have any chance, the Sixth Army would have needed to abandon the city and fight outward to meet it, to gamble everything on one desperate lunge. That order never came, or came too late, or came hedged with conditions that doomed it. The relief column fell back. The horizon went dark again. And inside the cauldron, the men understood, slowly, what the silence to the southwest meant. No one was coming. What happened inside the pocket through January is one of the hardest chapters of the entire war to tell. The cold came down like a weight. Temperatures that, by many accounts, fell far below freezing, deep into the kind of cold that kills exposed men in hours. There was no fuel to spare for warmth. There was almost no food. The horses were long gone. Men cut rations to a few hundred grams of bread, and less than memory. The wounded suffered worst. The field hospitals, if they could be called that, filled beyond capacity with men whose injuries could not be treated and whose bodies could not fight the cold. Frostbite took fingers, feet, lives. Disease moved through the weakened ranks. Many simply lay down in the snow and did not get up. These had been, not long before, confident soldiers in a winning army. Now they wrote letters home that they knew might never be sent. Letters full of cold and hunger and a dawning, terrible clarity about how this would end. Some of those last letters survived. They are not the words of monsters or heroes. They are the words of frightened, freezing men who wanted to live. The cauldron was shrinking by the day. The Soviets were squeezing it from every side. And still, from far away, the order held. No surrender. At the very end, the commander of the doomed army was given a strange and terrible gift. He was promoted. In the final days of January 1943, General Paulus was raised to the rank of Field Marshal, the highest in the German army. The men who study this moment have long read it as a message, not an honor. In the whole of German history, it was said, no field marshal had ever been taken alive by an enemy. The promotion by this reading was a quiet instruction. A field marshal does not surrender. A field marshal finds another way out. The meaning, if that is what it was, would have been clear enough. The newly made field marshal chose differently. By the end of January, the pocket had been split in two. The men were beyond fighting. To go on would mean only that more of them froze and starved for nothing. And so, on the 31st of January, the southern pocket gave up. A couple of days later, on the 2nd of February, the last resistance in the north fell silent. It was over. The proud Sixth Army, which had marched east in the summer to win a war, surrendered in the ruins of a city it had destroyed. A field marshal among the captured, the first of his rank to be taken alive. When the guns finally stopped, the Soviets took roughly 90,000 prisoners from the ruins. They were not an army anymore. Photographs and accounts from those days describe long columns of ragged, frostbitten men shuffling out of the city into captivity, wrapped in blankets and looted scraps against the cold, many of them sick, many of them barely able to walk. Ahead of them lay a march, and then the camps, often far to the east. The journey itself killed many who had survived the battle. They were exhausted, starving, and freezing before they ever set out, and the conditions of captivity in that terrible winter were brutal. And here's the figure that says everything about Stalingrad. Of those roughly 90,000 men taken prisoner at the end, by most accounts, only around 5,000 or 6,000 ever saw their homes again. The rest died in captivity, or simply never came back. And for those, many came home years later, in the 1950s, more than a decade after the city fell. A few thousand in the end, lived to grow old. History would call Stalingrad a turning point, and it was. After this, the great German advance in the east never truly recovered its confidence. The myth of the unstoppable army had frozen and died in the ruins on the Volga. From here, slowly, terribly, the long tide began to turn the other way. But turning points are a thing we name afterward. From a safe distance, looking down at the map, the men who lived it knew nothing of turning points. They knew the cold. They knew the river. They knew the next cellar, and the friend who was there in the morning and gone by night. It is worth remembering how their stories reach us. Both sides told this battle to suit themselves. The winners as a glorious triumph of will, the losers as a tragedy of betrayal from above. Propaganda ran thick on every side. The honest truth is harder and quieter, that hundreds of thousands of ordinary men on every side were fed into a single ruined city by leaders who would not stop. Until the snow itself ran gray, the city was rebuilt. New streets rose over the rubble. Today there are memorials there, and quiet places where people come to remember. The Volga moves as it always did, but if you stand where the doomed army once stood and listen, you may understand what the survivors meant. That when the loudest place on earth fell silent at last, it left behind only three things: smoke, iron,